Welcome back. Yes, indeed, as you may have seen there, the Minister of State for Health joins us next, Senator Mamora, to shed some light on the decision of the PTF on COVID-19. Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming on this morning. So, well, mixed feelings in the country.
Good morning.
All right, mixed feelings in terms of how people are receiving this announcement. I'm not sure the task force is surprised at how people respond to this, but before now, there had been a comment or two, I think including yourself, not being satisfied with the way that Nigerians were complying with the first phase of the ease of lockdown. So I'm just wondering now, having taken this decision to extend this first phase, was there an overarching thought or mindset among the committee that, well, this time around, Nigerians, we will all get it right?
Well, one thing that we all must hang on to is hope. And when you lose hope, then you lose everything. But when you keep hope alive, then there is much to be achieved. Yes, as you rightly did say, we've not been too comfortable with the level of compliance of directives and directories issued by government in respect of managing, COVID-19 with respect to what we call non-pharmaceutical interventions. So we hope that Nigerians will really see the need to come to terms, with the reality on ground, in terms of taking responsibility for their own health, because the primary responsibility for your health lies with you. So, in the circumstance, what we needed to do was to extend the period of the first phase.
Okay, I know that you also spoke about the strategy, the 3 T's that you like to implement moving forward. But could you tell us about the how? I know my colleagues have talked about communication such that people can understand these messages and then operationalize and execute them. But how do you, or how is this policy or this next phase, those specifics, what should we expect?
Well, essentially, there will be need. We will continue to ramp up our sensitization and awareness campaign, which we've been doing all along. And some people, will appreciate that. Some still kind of live in denial. And that's a major issue, which we will continue to do this advocacy, reaching out and having engagement with various segments of the society, the faith-based organizations, the civil society groups, the community leaders, name it. We're going to reach out. And of course, the high-level engagement with the governors of the various states themselves, because as elected officials at that level, that very high level, they have to do a lot in their respective states. And you also appreciate that they are the ones that will really do the enforcement in their various states. So there's also the issue of enforcement. They need to appeal to our law enforcement agents to ramp up this enforcement as well. Of course, we will also need to do more testing. We need to do more testing, having opened more laboratories. We now have, I think, about 27 laboratories. So this will help us increase the pace of testing. In so doing, of course, testing is not just about sample collection. We have observed the delay of sort in terms of turnaround time. So we will need to look at the logistics involved and do what we need to do to reduce the turnaround time of having test results after samples have been collected. Well, we still do some tracing, contact tracing where we can. Unfortunately, in most of the states, we have virtually moved into the community phase of transmission. And when you are at that level, it becomes quite difficult for you to do any meaningful contact tracing. Of course, the third T there, I talked about testing, I talked about tracing, is treatment. We have our treatment centers all over the place, which hitherto was at about 3,000 nationwide, but that has increased now to about 5,000. So we need to do the treatment. So that's another thing that we need to do. And of course, we also need to continue to monitor activities of our people in terms of managed approach. When I say managed approach, because the markets have been opened, but there are things that we expect to be in place to make that effective at various centers of activities in terms of economic activities, with the things that we need to monitor. Of course, the use of face masks is very important. The need to enforce physical distancing is very important. In our transportation systems, people getting into buses, going to work, getting into kidnap and all that. Because all these things have been spelled out, but it's not enough for these things to be spelled out. It's very important that people comply with the directives and advisories in this regard.
Well, if we can try to unbundle some of the things that you have mentioned, Doctor, it would seem like all the things that you have talked about are the things that we did over the past 2 weeks. And this is the result that we have. We have to, as my colleague said earlier, repeat this same class for another 2 weeks. Now, to the issue of the governors, the interface with governors that you mentioned, I understand that the PTF COVID-19 has had to interface with the governors in the previous 2 weeks, had this kind of conversations that you talked about as well. Going forward in the next 2 weeks, what is going to be different? Definitely, it is their job to execute some of the things that you have talked about, and ultimately, it is in these states that these cases are going to be treated. What is going to be different in the interface of the committee, the PTF COVID-19, with the governors in the next 2 weeks?
Well, you know that the popular saying that repetition enhances emphasis. So we will continue the engagement. You recall that even as we speak, we still have issues with some state governments in terms of, cooperation and collaboration. One or two states we're still having, much as we appreciate that need for engagement, for collaboration and all that, I wouldn't say that the cooperation has been absolute. So where one or two states where we seem to have issues, we continue to appeal to the state government in these states, affected states, and getting them to see the realities, maybe from our own prison, because they may not see these things from their own end. So we continue to talk to them, and I did say earlier on that the issue of hope, you just have to sustain hope and believe that along the line, we will all be seen to be working, not at cross purposes, but having the same understanding regarding the issues we are trying to manage. So we will continue. It's just to increase the engagement. And you recall that even yesterday, Mr. President had a virtual engagement with the state governors. And that is part of the efforts from our own end, that Mr. President, being at the highest level of government in the country, now having this engagement, is part of that, is part of what we intend to achieve. And now, Mr. President himself engaging the state governors, I think that will also go a long way. So we are not relenting. We're not relenting in any way.
I don't know if that is to suggest that the governors and the PTA of COVID-19 are not on the same page, so to speak, about how we should be approaching this matter. You may want to react to that very, very quickly. You mentioned some states that you are not getting adequate cooperation from. Any particular states in particular?
Well, I think let's just leave that. The important thing is that we are having greater understanding in terms of our approach and engagement. You see, we talk of what WHO has suggested from day one is to have one national response. And when we say national response, yes, we do know that we operate subnational governments as well. So one national approach, but when it comes to implementation of policies, because of the differences in terms of areas and, the realities, this may not be absolutely same. So we will allow for local peculiarities to be taken on board by the respective governments at the subnational levels. But be that as it may, we will still, because at the end of the day, in terms of assessment, it will be on the national output. So we are getting that, we are pushing that through, and we are getting some level of, high level of cooperation. There may not be perfection, as in any human situation, but then where we have the challenges, we are doing all we can to ensure that the rough edges, so to speak, are smoothened.
If you could just shed a little more light so that I can be a little clear on that. When you say one national approach, does that mean that when policies are pronounced, at that level, the states, perhaps if they want to ease their lockdown, can then seek that permission to ease the lockdown? Is that what you mean by peculiarities from different states, or what exactly do you mean?
You will recall, Chamberlain, for example, even the issue of night curfew, it was already being implemented by some states, which was based on certain realities in such states. That's one. If you look at the issue of easing of lockdown, in some states, the easing of lockdown had been put in place even before the national pronouncement. So these are some of the things. Of course, the prohibition on interstate travel and the like. So these are some of the things that some of the states had even put in place prior to making a national pronouncement and all that. So what we are saying is that they know, he who feels it knows it. They know certain realities in their system, and we are not objecting to that. But when we talk about policy, if we say, well, we need to reduce interaction, we need to reduce contact. So there are various ways that this can be implemented. So this is what I mean. And
okay.
Of course, some of the states, they have not really waited for the national body, as represented by NCDC, to open the PCR testing centers. They have gone ahead. They will still invite the NCDC to come and verify, and then, of course, give them accreditation in terms of the what ought to be on ground for testing purposes, PCR-based testing. So this is what I mean, that it's still one national approach, but you will still take on board local peculiarities in terms of implementation of that national policy.
Okay, now one of the challenge points was that, some state governors had spoken up about the interstate lockdown, how security agencies were compromising all of that process. So what's going to happen? Has there been any conversation with either security agencies in terms of how to progress or how to do things moving forward?
Oh, yes. It's part of the engagement that I also mentioned, because I must commend our security agents, because at PTF level, we cannot do it alone. We have to continue to encourage where there are lapses or gaps that are identified. We'll try to correct, we try to bridge the gaps. So the security officials, I must commend them, because they're also part and parcel of our first line workforce, so to speak, because you see these people on the roads, doing their checks and looking at, ensuring that people comply. So they are also being exposed one way or the other, because they do not know what these people, the passengers, possibly, or the people that they come across in course of their legitimate duties, to the nation. So, yes, we do talk to them, we engage them, and where we get a feedback that we need to follow through, we do that. Maybe, one or two misdemeanors and all that. So these are part of the things that we do. And when we talk of all of government, all of society, these are some of the things we mean. That everybody has a role to play, and we need to bring everybody on board to achieve the desired goal at the end of the day.
So some will wonder, when you say misdemeanor, do you mean maybe collection of bribe? And would also like to know, has there been any commitment from those security agencies, maybe at the level of the leadership? Has there been any form of, acknowledgement of these things, and then they say, moving forward, we're going to ensure that these things stop?
Oh, yes. We like I did say, where we have established some not too good situations, we bring this up at the various levels, whether at the level of the police, at the level of the armed forces, the various, levels, whether it is military and whether it is even the officials of internal affairs, that is immigration, what have you. We engage all these people, and they have representatives at the PTF. So we have a kind of daily briefing as well, in terms of activities, in terms of what has been observed in one location or the other, whether the land borders or just name it, whether at the border, at the seaport and what have you. We have daily report, and we have this interaction, and of course we examine what is before us, and we decide what to do in the circumstance, and whatever level of engagement we need to put in place, we do that, and I mean on daily basis.
Okay. Now, this is meant to, this extension of the phase is meant to end by 1st of June, in about 2 weeks. And the big question for a lot of people is, what is the goal we're trying to achieve? Are we trying to say that at the end of that period, we should have gotten to a level where we record maybe 50 cases and below, especially because people want to know what the goal is so they can key in and say, this is where we're working towards. So what is the goal? What are we hoping to achieve with this extension?
Well, essentially, whatever gains that we might have made so far, we're hoping to consolidate on such gains, whether in terms of sensitization and awareness creation. We want to consolidate on that. Whether you're talking, number two, in terms of the readiness, our response activities, whether in terms of our treatment centers or our isolation centers or the human resource for health capacity, whether in terms of the ambulance services, just name it. All this, whatever gains that we have made so far, we need to consolidate on them and improve on what is on ground. We're opening more treatment centers. You recall that just some days back, about last week, the This Day Dome in Abuja, which is a very large center for treatment and for isolation, was opened, of course, and we are putting structures in place to now make the place run. We had official handing over. So these are some of the things that we want to achieve, and of course, we go ahead to monitor compliance in terms of the basic things that we've talked about: wearing of mask, hand washing, and of course physical distancing and all these things. So we're just going to improve in terms of getting people to comply with these directives. Those are the things, and we feel that given another 2-week period, we would achieve more. Even in terms of our testing, like I said before, having opened more laboratories, we need to see, how much we're achieving, in that. I mentioned the issue of turnaround with a time, which is a little bit not what we want it to be. So we will look at what we can do to increase that, because that will go a long way to help. Because if you have people that are waiting for the results.
Okay, just a couple of more issues that we'd like to clarify from the people as well. They'd like you to speak to those issues, but we will do that when we come back in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Well, we still got the Minister of State for Health, Senator Mamora, with us from our studios in Abuja. Well, Senator, some of the challenges that we're looking to solve while this additional, this 2-week first phase is being repeated is that there are those who are of the opinion that, for instance, in states where they have lockdown till 3 p.m., they just wonder, they think that targets the regular 9-to-5 workers, that some of the other people who have got to be on the roads beyond that time, people who make ends meet, who it turns out that those are their own peak period where they make money. So it's difficult to coordinate all of those things. So in terms of getting results and doing things differently, Did the PTF on COVID-19 factor some of these challenges? Is there more stimulus package going on to people? What's happening in that regard?
Thank you very much, Kimberly. Yes, that's part of what I said earlier on, that states, yes, you agree on a lockdown, fine. But in terms of implementation of this lockdown, you discover that this may vary from state to state, looking at certain realities on ground. Now, once you put in place lockdown, you cannot achieve all the desired goals without backing it up with palliatives. No doubt about that. That is the truth. And that is what is being done through the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. So we necessarily must put in place palliative to help cushion the effect of this lockdown, because there are people who are daily paid. I mean, in terms of eking out a livelihood. So we must take on board this. But in so doing as well, we are also conscious of the fact that it might be difficult to really reach out to everyone. That is the truth. So, but in as much as we can do as a government, we will do. And that's why I want to appreciate various groups that have been helping out as well. Various NGOs, various faith-based organizations, various individuals, groups, companies, name it, that have been coming out to help. You see this in various places where food items are being supplied to people in one form or the other. This is the kind of partnership which we very much appreciate. So I'm just saying that what your observation, it's right. That is, palliatives must back up this lockdown if we want to have appreciable results. So that is being done.
Palliatives, especially for daily earners. You also mentioned that the transporters are part of these daily earners. But then I just want to find out, are there plans to interface with the transport unions all over the country, whether at the state level or at the national level? Because just as you mentioned, interstate lockdown, there's been flagrant disregard of that one. And even, at daytime, many of the guidelines that PTF COVID-19 and the state governments have come up with, many of them are largely disregarded. Is there any plan to interface with transporters, the various transport unions, commuter buses, and even, haulage vehicles on this in the next 2 weeks to see how much gains we can get within the next 2 weeks?
Yes, you recall that I did say earlier on that the engagement is continuous and it's continuing. And it's at all levels. We try to identify the gaps. We try to identify where things have not really been smooth. And we look at what we can do in this circumstance. Yes, we are engaging them both at the national and at the state level. So, with a view to finding out, amicable resolution of the gaps that we have seen, and seeing how best to make people, reasonably comfortable. There's no doubt that this is a very, very difficult moment for every one of us. And I mean every one of us. It's a very difficult moment. But again, we need to continue to appeal to people to appreciate that whatever discomfort or whatever difficulties that we are going through at this point in time, it's only for a while. And that is where we need this cooperation. for the good of us all. Oftentimes, when we talk of enforcement, if we all appreciate the realities on ground, then you won't even need to do this enforcement as such, because it's just a matter of, saying that, look, for you, for me, that kind of approach. That is, whatever you do that will, save my own life, whatever I do that will save your own life, should be the approach. And if we have that understanding, then the enforcement that we need to put in place will be minimal. It will just be out of appreciating that this is a duty I owe to my fellow, men.
So as we wind down, we have just about 20 seconds to wrap up this conversation. I'm just curious, is it possible to have a list of goals that we hope to achieve at the end of this period? Maybe how many daily cases we want to achieve, how many tests we want to achieve, and some of those, visible deliverables so people can see it and say, okay, this is the destination, let's buy into it. Is it possible for the PTF COVID-19 to come up with such?
Well, yes, it is. Even if it's not necessarily quantitative, but it can be qualitative. The one that we can't quantify. For example, you recall that before the lockdown was even put in place, we had just 15 laboratories. But as at now, we have 27. And I do know that before we end this 2-week additional period to the phase 1, we will have increased that. We are 27 now. Probably by the end of the 2-week period, we will have had or established test laboratories in every state of the country, which will go a long way to increase our testing ability. Again, the turnaround time that I mentioned earlier on, which for now is between 48 hours to even 72 hours or more. We want to be able to reduce that to about 24 hours. So by the time we're able to get right certain logistics and, of course, the capacity that ought to be in place, we should be able to achieve that as well. Then, of course, take the issue of even the evacuees that come in. Thank God, you recall that yesterday some of the organizations came up wanting to assist us in that, because that's another kettle of fish on its own. The challenges we have when we bring these evacuees, and these are Nigerians. We have a duty to assist them in this period. So by the time we get out of this period, I think we would have been able to have a solid process in place that will address some of these issues. And of course, we continue to do our advocacy in terms of getting people to comply with the various measures in terms of distancing and what have you.
We certainly hope it turns out well at the end of the day. But we do thank you for coming on, Senator Mamora, Minister of State for Health. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
All right.